Hi, everybody. This is the Acoustic Guitar Show, and today we have another very special guest introduced by this. Please welcome Mr. Alex de Grassi.
Ciao, tutti.
Ciao, Alex.
Daniele, very nice to be here.
Nice meeting you. Thank you so much for doing this. You are a wonderful player, and you don't need me to say that, but I need to say that because I think I really think what I just said. And you are a very important part in all this project because you have been there since the very beginning. Should we say the modern fingerstyle guitar? You have a key role in what happened since the 70s. Am I right?
Well, yeah, I made my first recording in '77, or actually it came out in '78. So, and yeah,
so it's quite some time. So the first question I always ask is, how is it to grow up and become Alex de Grassi in a world that doesn't have an Alex de Grassi before?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I would say, I started playing guitar when I was 12 years old. And, I played a lot of folk music and pop music and learned to play everything from traditional folk and blues to Dylan to Mississippi John Hurt and Simon and Garfunkel and all that kind of stuff. I loved it. And I learned mostly by ear because, of course, in those days, we had no internet, and there was actually very few books and tablature music on folk and blues and all that. So I was like a lot of guitar players of my generation. I became a big fan of people like John Fahey and Leo Kottke and John Robbie Basho. So those were sort of and of course all the old blues guys like Mississippi John Hurt and Lightnin' Hopkins and all that. So that's where I got my inspiration. But when I started to write my own music, I was also a big fan of jazz and classical guitar. So I tried to bring these things all together in a way that I think hopefully I had my own voice. I started to develop my own voice, and I had kind of a vision for what I wanted to do, which was I'm very visual in my way of coming up with music. So, whether it's a city street or being out in the country, I get a lot of the ideas for my music from being in certain places. So I often thought of myself as not unlike, say, a visual artist who was drawing, a picture or telling a story, or a writer or something. I never thought of myself as primarily a musician because I came from it more from the end of trying to be a storyteller or to create a picture for somebody. And that I think maybe helped me establish my own voice. And in a world that had not yet had an Alex de Grassi in it, that's where I found my place. Yeah.
Great. This is very common. You are American, right?
Yes.
And acoustic guitar, steel string guitar, is an American instrument. Most of its history was born there through the great blues players at the beginning of the 20th century, and all the things that came right after. And it's interesting because some other player like you just described something very similar, coming from a folk background. So falling in love with the guitar through the music and the songs of great artists, which is probably why you all play such a great music. When did you realize that the acoustic guitar could be something different than just something to accompany a singer and be such a polyphonic instrument, so important and so full of things?
Right, that's a good question. I did start out playing. I'd listen to records and learn songs, and I used to sing. I was an okay singer, but not a particularly good singer. And I actually wrote a lot of songs back in my teens and into my early 20s. I spent a summer, 1973. I was 21. Spent the whole summer as a street musician in the London Underground in the Tube, and sang a lot of songs. Everything from, again, from Simon and Garfunkel to Stevie Wonder to old blues and all that stuff. And I used to write songs too. And I had a very good friend that we played together in the underground, and he would write a lot of songs and we'd sing together. But at some point I started to realize that I gravitated more towards playing guitar than being a singer or a songwriter. And as I did that, I started to realize that one could orchestrate the guitar. And I use that term a lot when I teach because that's the way I hear it. So, very simply put, that means you can have a melody, you can have a bass line, and you can have some other voices in there that might be there for rhythmic purposes or harmonic purposes or as a counter melody or something like that. So when I heard people like Leo Kottke and John Fahey, I started to hear that was possible with a steel string guitar. And I picked up on that and really tried to take that much further. And just to elaborate a little bit more, what I really think that I've focused on is taking all those elements, and if you play some of those things, some of those parts louder and others softer, you can create a very three-dimensional sound. So you get a lot of depth in the sound of the instrument itself, sonically. It feels like you're in a three-dimensional space. And that's what I really try to create when I write and perform solo pieces.
Great. So at a certain point, you became aware of this. Did you hear in your head something that had to happen, but you just didn't know how to make it happen in the beginning? Was it like that? Were you looking for something or?
Yes, yeah, very much so. And I think one of the keys for me was, even though I learned how to play guitar in standard tuning and learned, first as a folk and blues musician, chords and some basic, Travis picking and that kind of stuff. When I started to discover alternate tunings, I realized that it's an exploration process. Finding and creating or discovering different ways to tune the guitar is part of the process of exploring not only the harmonic but the sonic possibilities of the guitar. If you tune the strings down low, you start to get a different sound. And in the early days, I tuned a lot of my tunings up high, very, very high tunings like E, B, E, F sharp, B, E, a lot of tension on the guitar, even with medium gauge strings. And I got this very fast, bright sound that, characterized a lot of those early pieces. But, as I got older, I started to also realize it was hard to play, for one thing, but it was also, that I wanted to explore the other range as well, tuning strings down lower and getting those kinds of sounds. But yeah, it's an exploration process. And, again, I had this idea in my head. I had a couple other really rough ideas. So I was an early fan also of the pianist Keith Jarrett. And I really liked what he was doing as a solo improviser. So I tried to, I was inspired by that, and I wanted to be able to do that kind of thing and have that, again, that kind of orchestral sound. So in a way, there was a period of time for a few years where I wanted to be the Keith Jarrett of guitar.
Man. Oh, this is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just that idea that I could create something. And the other part of that is, I always said to myself, I love the sonic sounds. I love the sound of folk guitar. So I was also a big fan of all the British Isles players like John Renmore and Bert Jansch and Davy Graham and Martin Carthy, all those people. I just love the sound of the instrument, but I also love the idea of being able to explore other harmonic areas that you might find by. So I studied jazz guitar a bit and studied classical guitar and tried to, bring those worlds together a bit in my music.
This is very interesting. You brought up one of the main points, I think, on the guitar, because when you change tuning, you really change the character of the instrument as when you put up a capo, right?
Right.
People think that you put up a capo because you cannot play chords up on the neck, but that's completely wrong. I mean, the instrument just changes his sonic qualities. When did you become aware of the open tunings? Was that through someone like, I say, Johnny Mitchell or Nick Drake or whatever? I don't know.
Probably for me, it was John Fahey.
John Fahey.
When I was, again, in my mid-teens as a teenager, after kind of the initial discovery of folk and blues and learning how to play basics on guitar, I heard John Fahey and thought, this is so cool. I've never heard anything like this before. And, he used a lot of unusual tunings. And then, again, people like Robbie Basho and Leo Kottke. And it wasn't until much later that I started to be aware of Dadgad, which was such a popular thing among the British Isles and Irish players. And of course, Pierre Beznazan made Dadgad his standard tuning. I remember sitting, the first time I met Pierre, he came to play in San Francisco, and I got a call from his agent saying, he needs a place to stay. And I said, well, have him come stay at my house. So he came and visited, and we sat down, and he said, let's play a couple jazz tunes. Not that we're huge jazz players, but we could do that. And I was calling out chords to him, like, C minor ninth, B flat seven, and he could play them all in Dadgad. And I was like, how did you do that? He said, that's all I do. I just play in Dadgad. That's all I do. So, for me, the alternate tunings, I've never learned one as thoroughly as Pierre has learned Dadgad, but and I enjoy the exploration process, and I've probably used 20 plus tunings over the years, and some of them I've gotten familiar with a little bit. I kind of know my way around, but it's still an exploration process for me. So
great. And you were talking about Keith Jarrett and his solo shows. Do you try that kind of thing when you play live? I mean, is there some part in which you improvise or explore something?
I've done some of that. I sometimes will start a show just with a little improvisation. It's just a way to kind of relax and get my ears tuned to the hall and to hear the guitar in that room. And, it just sort of like, it's almost like exploring the hall. What does it sound like? What does this room that I'm playing in sound like? And, this is usually pretty brief. And then I've written a few pieces in which I can stretch out and improvise a little bit. But I think in the end, I found that pretty challenging. And other than, I have this instrument called a sympatar, which has sympathetic strings on it. And it's kind of like a guitar with the sound of a sitar on it. And that instrument, I've done a couple concerts where, because the strings respond when you play something, it's almost like you're playing with someone else, almost like you're jamming with somebody. And I've done a few concerts with that where I just totally improvised from the beginning to the end. And I've done a few experimental things, especially playing with other players. We'll do some free improvisation, but it's very challenging to do it solo. It's fun, but scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Guitar is unlike the piano, which is the other great polyphonic instrument. But I think they have, because of both hands, they have a freedom that is very hard to reach for us because we are always tied to the bass notes, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to put things together. So what you have always been an acoustic guitar player, right? I mean, always steel string, mostly.
Yeah, well, yeah, pretty much. I mean, oddly enough, my very first guitar was a nylon string guitar because my mother was not a musician, but my father and my grandfather were musicians. But my mother always encouraged us to play music, and she brought home a guitar for my older brother one day because he had a nice voice and he liked to sing. And she gave it to him, and it was a classical guitar. It was, a pretty modest guitar. And after 2 weeks, he wasn't really playing it, so I picked it up, and that's how I got started playing. But I pretty quickly changed to steel string, and as a teenager and into my early 20s, I also played some electric guitar in a couple, garage bands, mostly for fun. We play a few gigs, but I never got into the electric guitar too seriously. Although now that I'm, much older, and especially with, I don't travel as much, I've been sitting in with some local bands playing electric guitar, and I really.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love doing it, but it's not really my greatest strength. But yeah, so more for fun. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, a man full of of surprises. So, what's your idea about your idea? Not just your idea. Is there something you remember about those years? Because that's mainly the '60s, while you were forming you as a man and as a musician, right? So
Yeah.
the British invasion and rock music and the folk movement, all the old blues guys that were rediscovered in the American folk blues festivals and everything. It had to be a pretty interesting moment to be there. Is there something you just put together in your mind, your idea about what happened to bring up that kind of thing? Because there were the old blues guys that were very good guitar players, and there was the Merle Travis, Chet Atkins thing, which was completely different, but it was a very important part of what happened right after. And then the folk thing, and then all of a sudden, guys like John Fay were doing this unbelievable thing, like almost out of nowhere. Is there something you ever think about or thought about how everything got together and pieces taken from here and there created what you were into in later years?
Well, I certainly, every time one of those great 60s and even in the early 70s for me, bands came out with a new record. I had a really close friend, who's still a very close friend, who we learned to play guitar together, and we used to, like, oh, there's a new Beatles album, we got to go get it, and we'd come back and sit down and listen to it over and over again for hours, and we learned some of those songs, and then or Traffic, or or here's here's a new the band, here's a new Dylan album, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I definitely listened and followed the rock scene in particular, and the pop scene to maybe a lesser extent, but or here's a new Stevie Wonder album, so those were formative for me, because that music feels, even today, if I'm sitting around with friends just informally, and somebody says, hey, do you know that song? I say, well, if you start playing it, I'll immediately recognize it and be able to play it as well. So those things are somewhere still in me, and of course they were a huge inspiration. And when in the late 60s and early 70s, we had all those wonderful shows in San Francisco, because I grew up in a town just outside of San Francisco. And we would go see those shows, those Bill Graham shows, amazing concerts. I saw the band on a bill with Muddy Waters. I saw Chuck Berry on a show with The Doors. And I saw Miles Davis when he came out with that Bitches Brew album on a bill with the band Chicago. And those were just, not only were they amazing bands, all of them, but they were like so many different types of popular music and jazz coming together. And Bill Graham was a genius for putting them together on those bills, because you know, you don't see it that much anymore these days. You see it at some festivals, but those things, it just like, wow. And you know, when I saw Miles Davis playing with Chicago, he had Keith Jarrett in the band playing electric piano. I mean, probably the only time Keith Jarrett ever played electric piano, you know. So, you know, those things made a huge impression on me and my friends who are big music fans, and some of them were musicians. So, it's all in there somewhere. You know, another big band that was a little bit later, I was a huge fan of the group Weather Report. And of course, Wayne Shorter and Joe Zawinul and Wayne Shorter's still around, just phenomenal musicians and brilliant composers. And I took a lot of inspiration from that group, because one thing I learned from Weather Report was that you could create a rhythm, because they always had amazing percussionists and drummers and bass players in their bands, and do something on top of it, like, you know, have Wayne Shorter play on top of it. And you know, they'd have these long, you know, rhythms that just felt like a Persian carpet or something, you know, like some beautiful tapestry, and then just weave these lines in and out of it. And I just love that stuff. And that was a real big inspiration for me as well. So I really tried to absorb a lot of it. I did go through my classical guitar period a little later and learned, you know, a lot of South American classical guitar, you know, Villalobos, Barrios,
great,
all that.
Lauro.
And I even played the Rodrigo guitar concerto years later with my little regional orchestra, which terrified me, because it's, you know, it was a little outside of my what I normally do. But
with classical guitar or steel string?
Yeah, I played classical guitar quite a bit in I would say in my 30s. I went through a period after I had made about 4 or 5 recordings and toured quite a bit. I started thinking, you know, I never spent much time playing classical guitar. So I got a guitar, and I was fortunate, I had some friends who were professional, you know, very good performers on classical guitar, and they just gave me tips. You know, we'd talk on the phone and say, how do you do that classical tremolo? You know, and it's like, okay, you know, well. So, and I spent a lot of time reading music, and it helped my reading skills tremendously, which was good, because later on when I began transcribing, or more recently, for example, I've written arrangements for a group, or some 2 guitar music for 2 guitars, and I need to write out the music. You know, it really helped me a lot. So I've really tried to draw on everything, and you know, but when I sit down and warm up now, I'll play a few scales and do a few exercises, and then I'll usually play a 12-bar blues, just because and it's a great way to remember, you know, where you came from. So
there's so much blues in what you play, even if sometimes it might not be so evident, you know, such on the first thing you think of, but there's so much. And so those years were in which you were listening to all this amazing music, so different one from the other. Those were the years when you were looking for your sound, and you were looking for something to become what you are today. How do you remember how long it took from the moment you decided that that was going to be something to when you thought you were ready to do something?
Yeah, well, it took me a little while. I have friends, for example, who started playing music when they were quite young. By the time they were teenagers, they were quite sure that's what they want to do, and some of them even became professional players. I worked with the guys early on in my career when I first started touring. I opened a lot of shows for the Dave Grisman Quintet.
Oh, nice.
And Mike Marshall and Daryl Anger, who were in that group, both great musicians. I mean, they were playing professionally when they were still teenagers, playing in bluegrass bands. I, on the other hand, was kind of like more of a closet player up until, I went off to college, and I started playing in, the student, lounge and student coffee shop and stuff like that. And I was thinking, well, I should get a degree in something more practical, and and I kind of went in and out of college and all this. But all along I kept playing, but it was more of a private thing. And then all of a sudden, I had written a few pieces, and that was when the Windham Hill record label was getting started. And Will Ackerman said, "Hey, let's record your music."
Like that.
I got to go to graduate school in something entirely different, in geography. And
how did he become aware of you?
Well, you may know that Will and I are actually cousins. So
I didn't.
We grew up in the same town in Palo Alto, south of San Francisco, and our mothers were sisters. And
I think Tuck and Patty live in Palo Alto.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was total coincidence that Will and I, because there was a long period of time from the time maybe since I was a teenager until the time of Windham Hill getting started, that we didn't see each other, because Will was mostly then on the East Coast of the U.S. And then we kind of met one day on the street. We hadn't seen each other since we were kids, basically. We said, "Well, what are you doing?" And Will said, "Well, I'm recording this record." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, I playing acoustic guitar. I'm doing this thing." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm playing acoustic guitar. Well, what do you do?" And it was like that. And next thing we knew, we were making my recording. So it was, as we say in English, somewhat serendipity, or even potentially nepotistic.
You came in through the main door.
Yeah, but it was interesting because it was
well deserved.
Yeah, remember in this time it was the Windham Hill Records was nothing. Nobody knew anything about it. So when I made my first record, really, it was just a hobby. It was just for fun, And then I was very fortunate because it was the time when suddenly people started recognizing both Will and myself. And, within a short period of time, we were suddenly recording artists, and we were out playing gigs. And shortly after, I had an agent, and it all happened very quickly. But it didn't happen until I was about 26, 27 years old. So.
Great. That was an incredible moment for acoustic guitar, because I think after the great things that Leo Kalki, John Fabe before they did in the 70s, all those great players like you and Pierre and Peter and many others just came out, and it's interesting because if you think of the old blues players, each one of them has a very distinctive style. You cannot say these three players are the same, like today happened for many players, which you don't even recognize them if you don't see the face. And what happened in the 70s, to what I feel, is like you guys just recreated that kind of thing in another moment in time with a different music, but with the same instrument. So each one of you has a very distinctive personality and a different history, and maybe you influenced one another, but everything came out from a personal history, and this is amazing. It's really great because everything came out. This is why I asked, how is it to become Alex de Grassi in a war without Alex de Grassi? Because it's not that simple.
Yeah. No, I think for whatever reason, I did have a very, I hesitate to use the word vision because people sometimes think, you're
in California, you can think of something else.
You're a demigod, you're a cult leader or something. No, but what I meant is I had this kind of idea, in me that said, I know what I want to do. I don't know how to do it yet, but I kind of know what I want to do. And what I want to do is what I was saying is I want to be able to tell stories or make be able to play something on the guitar that will take people to imagining something, that will help them imagine something. So, and what I always say when I teach students in workshops and so forth, and they ask about composing a composition or how to write a piece or how do you get the ideas, I say, you just have to listen to yourself and in the environment around you and take that in, and it's wonderful to study and emulate other great guitar players, and it's very valuable. But if you want to be a composer or have your own distinct voice, you need to kind of at some point say, okay, that's all in me, everything I've learned, but now I have to sit and listen. Literally, you can sit and listen, and for me, the ideas. The other thing that people ask me all the time is, well, what do you start with? Do you start with a melody? Do you start with some chords? And I say, no, I almost always start with a rhythm. I said, life is
rhythm.
Great. And, a friend of mine, Daniel Levitin, he's a neuroscientist and he had been a music writer and player before, and he wrote a book called "This Is Your Brain on Music," which was very popular in this country anyway. And I did a talk with him. He invited me to do a talk with him once in San Francisco, and he said something that really struck me, which is the word in English, emotion. Okay, and we associate emotion with the creative process in terms of being able to create a feeling, an emotion, or elicit an emotion from people. Whether it's in a novel or in a painting or a play or a film or music or whatever it is. We're always trying to convey an emotion. And he said, you think what the word emotion is E, which in a lot of European, Western languages means from or out of, I guess if you went back to Latin,
Yeah, sure.
And motion, which is movement.
Motion,
and
yeah.
So emotion really means something comes from movement. And that's how I feel about music, is if something literally moves me and I start to feel that movement, and sometimes it's very physical, like walking. We had, of course, all the blues guys had walking blues and
yeah.
those kinds of things, and it had a certain rhythm, a shuffle rhythm, all that stuff. And then some of it's maybe more cerebral, like meaning that it's less here and maybe more up here, or maybe it's more in the heart or the feeling. But that to me is where I get all the ideas. I always start eventually with a rhythmic idea, and it could be something existing, like a bossa nova or a blues shuffle or a jazz swing or a traditional folk rhythm. But I like to think that a lot of my own music that I've written, it's maybe a mixture of those things a lot of times, or maybe it's a mixture of that plus something that I'm just connecting with, while I sit and kind of listen to myself and my environment. And sometimes it's things like rain, sometimes it's like watching traffic go down the street. Maybe it's a movie I saw, a certain scene in the movie triggers something, but it often starts with motion and the rhythm.
Yeah, and of course, life is movement, and rhythm is so well received. If you see a little kid, maybe 1 year or 2 years old, and if you put some rhythm on, they just start dancing.
Yeah.
Because they feel the rhythm. No one has to tell them what to do. They just start dancing. Yeah. So this is very interesting. Very interesting.
The great Indian tabla player Zakir Hussain, who lives in the States, I think most of the time anyway. I know his wife is Italian, I believe, but I had a chance to work with him once, and he told me, he's a phenomenal musician, just a genius, and he also comes from an amazing musical family. His father, Ala Raka, was the tabla player for the sitar player, the very famous sitar player. My mind is a blank.
Ravi Shankar?
Ravi Shankar, thank you. And I asked him, well, when did you start to play? And he said, well, actually, I started to learn the rhythms before I was born. Because he said his father would tap out the rhythms on his mother's belly when she was pregnant with him. And I thought, now that's really getting an early start. And
yeah.
It's really tapping into something that everybody, little kids, like you say, they recognize that right away. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, this is amazing. I mentioned before in private the Zipper, which is one of your records, one of the newest albums. It was a while ago, but it's not among the first production. And it's a wonderful record. It's one of the best sounding records I've ever heard. It's some wonderful music. I stole the Zipper tuning from that, and I wrote some music on that because it was such an inspiration. And I was wondering through that, because you mentioned your first album came out in 78. So I think the Zipper is like 20 years later, right?
Yeah, 98, actually 20 years, exactly.
Actually, 20 years later. So I think you were, since the first album, to get at such a good, after 20 years, someone like you that writes music, sometimes it's just, dried up, and, maybe the compositions and the imagination is just gone because you did everything. But that record showed that you were in a constant process of growing and getting better and better. How did you feel you were growing and finding new things after that first record, which came, I don't want to say by accident, but it was kind of.
Yeah.
How do you feel things were moving after?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, and I know what you're saying. Sometimes people make a few projects and then they're kind of done.
Yeah, it's over.
But I have tried to keep learning, and in different ways, largely by listening to all kinds of music. And I really do. People say, well, what's your favorite kind of music? I say, I like all kinds of music. If I hear something that I think
good one
or it moves me, I like it. And I don't care if it's rock and roll or, Tibetan chanting or, Stravinsky or Miles Davis or, Tommy Emmanuel, it's all great, and so that I think is really important. And that's been tremendous to help me keep inspired to keep exploring new kinds of music. And the other thing is to actually study, So, for example, I mentioned as a teenager, I was pretty much self-taught, and I learned also from friends, other kids who were playing guitar, and a few books and things like that. And I had studied music when I was even younger, a little bit in school. I played trumpet in school bands up until I was about 12, 13 years old. But when I picked up a guitar, it was mostly by ear, and that's, all the folk and blues and so forth. And then I had a chance, when I went to school, I took some jazz guitar lessons. I studied music a little bit in college. And then when I made my recording and got out and started playing my first recordings, I decided after a few years, I need to learn more about music. So I started delving into classical guitar. I studied voice. I studied jazz piano. I tried to get some percussion lessons from a really good player, a friend. He said, "No, I won't teach you because it'll hurt your hands." But I listened to a lot.
Good friend.
I listened to a lot of percussion music, and I have a drum set. I sometimes sit down and play a little bit. I'm not particularly good, but I like being able to experience music outside of the guitar world, and I think that's really important. Is you can't just say, well, I only listen to guitar music and I'm only interested in guitar music, because I think you're limiting yourself tremendously. So, and I studied private composition some years after that with a teacher. And, right now I'm working on a recording project with two singers, these two women, the Sarahs, they're called because they're both named Sarah, and they're folk musicians. And it's taken me back, in a way, to that time when I was really young, and I learned to play all these folk songs. And they write their own songs, but it's, mostly 3 and 4 chord songs. But they're great songs, and they sing beautifully. And it's like, I'm relearning how to play stuff that one might say, well, that's kind of simple, isn't it? And it's like, yeah, but it's great music, and it's creative. So I think, you just have to keep staying open to all kinds of music, and have a healthy respect for all kinds of music, because otherwise it's just your world gets narrower and narrower as you go forward.
Yeah. So you're always studying.
Yeah, I'm always learning something. Yeah.
This is a great way of it. You're into the because of what you just said. The old Louis Armstrong said there's just two kind of music, the good and the bad.
yeah.
And
that's a subjective thing, for some people.
That's the point.
It's going to be different, but yeah, I think that's a great expression.
Yeah. Is there something you're working on at the time as a fingerstyle guitar player?
Well, we're just about to release next month in September an EP, 3 songs that I recorded with Andrew York, who's quote
beautiful
classical guitarist. He played with the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet for many years.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he won a couple Grammys doing it, and he's a great composer himself, wonderful player. And over the last several years, we've played a number of concerts together and had some repertoire, some pieces that he's written, some that I've written. And we're finally, after all these years, releasing a 3-track EP. There are 2 compositions of mine and 1 of Andrew's. And it's you'll be surprised. It's yet again kind of different. It's some of the pieces are pretty out there. I wrote one. The title track for the EP is called Zero Gravity, and it was inspired because I had made contact. I was contacted by an astronaut, an American astronaut named who is a doctor. Dr. Thomas Marshburn. He's a medical doctor, and he contacted me and said, I'm going up. This was some years ago. He said, I'm going up on the space shuttle, and I'm an amateur guitar player, and I love your music, and I'm going to take one of your CDs. And when he came back, he sent me a picture of him standing with the CD was floating in front of the window
space
with the earth in the background.
Wow!
And then we started a conversation by email, and he said, "Well, I'm going up on the International Space Station next year, or in a few months." He said, "Would you like to get a phone call from space?" And I said, "Yeah." So I had a FaceTime phone call with him, and my wife and I sat in my little studio with a monitor, and we called NASA in Houston, and they said, "Stand by," and they connected us. And then for the next hour, I had this phone call with him. He's floating around the space station, giving us a tour with a camera, and then going up to the window where they look out at the Earth. And when we started the conversation, they were over the east coast of China. And when we finished, they had gone all the way around the world and the equator, and were crossing out over the Atlantic, over Brazil. And
this is quite amazing.
They'd almost done a complete orbit of the Earth, because they orbit every hour and a half. So this is an hour call. And so they're all floating, and I played a few tunes for the crew. I played for them because there were 3 guitar players on the crew, 2 American, a Canadian, and a Russian. And so that was a lot of fun, and it inspired me. And I thought, wow, zero gravity, what a concept. You think about when we were talking about motion and, how I get ideas from motion. I thought, wow, these guys are floating around. And so we kept up this conversation. I had emails back and forth with him while he was still up in the space station. And then when he got back, we had a phone call. And I wrote this piece, anyway, dedicated to him, called Zero Gravity, for 2 guitars. So Andrew York and I playing. And
amazing.
So it's kind of out there. It's appropriately what we'd say in English. It's kind of spacey.
It's kind of spacey, yeah.
So,
Just advertised photography. If you have the picture of your record with the earth on the background, I think you're the first man on earth to have that kind of advertisement. That's
well, I know there's one. I think there are others actually, but
okay.
There's the guitarist Muriel Anderson. You may know her.
Yeah, sure. She's a good friend.
She also had an astronaut take one of her CDs into space. But I got the phone call with them, which was pretty amazing to have this live interaction with the crew while they were floating around. Anyway, so that's the title piece, and then there's also another piece I wrote, and then one of Andy's great. And
when you write pieces for 2 guitars, you write both parts of a guitar, or you just leave up to the other player to?
No. It's very composed in this case. I write everything out, and then
both parts.
Yeah, both parts, and it's pretty intricate. In this case, it's it's actually pretty complex, but. Not because I wanted to be complex. It just worked out that way. But it's
sure.
a difficult piece to play, but hopefully people will enjoy it. It's a bit challenging listening. It's
nice.
Kind of out there.
Yeah, really curious about that.
I'll make sure you get it. So.
Oh, thank you. So I don't know if there is something you would like to say about how the guitar just took over the world, because in the beginning it was just some singer playing a few tunes, and all of a sudden there is this amazing music that took over.
Well, of course, the electric guitar when I was a kid was already hugely popular, and the guitar, the folk or steel string guitar was also popular, but. It's remarkable how much progress or how much development there has been. I mean, today there are, you mentioned back, in the, old blues guys and John Fahey and Leo Kaki and Robbie Basho. And then you mentioned, well, then there was Will Ackerman and myself and Pierre Ben-Suzanne, and then of course Michael Hedges, who kind of blew the head off of everybody.
Yeah.
His amazing approach to playing. And now, I mean, there's thousands of them out there, and there's some great guitar players. And you think about the level of playing now, it's just it's mind blowing for people like me who've been around, playing since the '60s, and you just go, wow. These people, I don't even know who they all are, but they're just amazing, So it's things have really, really exploded. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you have such a great role in everything, because there is something before and something after all of you guys in those years. So this was very inspiring. I don't know how to thank you for this. This was beautiful, and every time I talk to one of you guys, I suddenly realize, well, you are so good, because there is so much behind just those 6 strings and a piece of wood, which is astonishing. It's great. It's great to hear these things from your own voices. This is really something. So thank you again for doing this. It's been a pleasure. I hope to meet again one day. I saw you live in Rome many years ago, but you were not aware that I was there, so I just saw you playing.
Well, I would love to get back to Italy. I've only played in Rome a few times, but I have played in Italy a lot, over the years, and I love to visit there. It's always fun. The audiences are great. And, Italy's an amazing place for us Americans to see, and of course the food is fantastic and people are great. I hope to get back. This pandemic is making life difficult for all of that, but hopefully we'll get through that. And Daniele, grazie mille for this is fun to talk to you, and
thank you for doing this.
I feel like I've had so much support from the Italian music audience over the years, so I'm really grateful for that.
Great. So I will end the broadcast, and we can say goodbye in private right after. So everyone, this was the Acoustic Guitar Show. Today we had Alex de Grassi. Thank you, Alex. Once more, I will end the broadcast just like that.
Ciao.
Goodbye.